Hello, everyone, and welcome to our district administration web seminar here today, which is entitled Focus on Fidelity, Gearing Up for Successful Science of Reading Instruction, which is brought to you by the generous support of our sponsor here today, iStation. Now, before we get started, I would like just to share a few housekeeping items with you very quickly. If at any time during today's presentation you need any technical support, please use the chat panel, which you can find is on the lower right-hand side of your screen. Then select on my name, Stephen Blackburn, either that or host, and then type your message, and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. I'm also, about to submit a phone number and access code in the chat that you can dial in if you want to listen in privately, or if you don't have any speakers, so look out for that. We will also be welcoming any questions you have today with a Q&A session that will be happening at the end of the presentation. You can submit a question by using the Q&A panel, which is at the bottom right side of your screen, and then send your questions to all panelists. If you currently don't see the chat or the Q&A panels, just look again to the bottom right-hand side of your screen, then click on the expand triangle, which is directly in front of the panel name, and that will show you if you have access to it or not. Also, the last point I'd like to make, and then we'll get right started, is that if you would like to access the webinar at a later time, please know that everyone who is registered and who is attending here today, all of you will receive an email with a link to the slides as well as an archive recording. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers that we have here today. We have Sonia Solak, who is a strategic partnership consultant at iStation, and Sabrina Jones, who is the director of professional services at iStation. Welcome, and thanks for being here today. We're really excited. Thank you. All right, and you may begin. Just you're currently muted, I believe, if you're speaking right now.
Hi, Wes. Thank you. Thank you guys so much for being here today. This is Sabrina Jones talking to you for the moment. Today's during our session, we are going to be going over quite a few tips and tricks as you get prepared to start your new school year, or if you've already started your school year. It's never too late to begin. But today we're going to focus on communicating consistent science of reading expectations with your peers, with your educators, and your campuses. How do you effectively implement the science of reading at your schools? We're going to engage with proven work methods through professional development, how to support that initiative for science of reading, and how do we prepare our educators to become literacy advocates. But before we get started, we are going to do a quick poll to kind of get a gauge on the audience and where you are in your implementation of science of reading. So Stephen, if you would launch that poll, that would be great. Thank you. The question is, how comfortable are your educators with implementing science-based reading instruction? A, not at all comfortable, needs some more training. B, somewhat comfortable, but more training would be helpful. Or they're really comfortable and they're rock stars. So we'd like to hear your experience and your gauge on where your educators are at this point.
There we go.
Alrighty. Did you post the results, Stephen? Oh,
Sorry,
there they are.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. There we go. So we have 37% not comfortable if you're in the right spot, 58% somewhat comfortable. You're also in the right spot and really comfortable. We might lean on your expertise throughout this presentation today. So thank you for taking the time to fill that out for us today. So your presence here today speaks volumes about what you feel and how much you're prepared to support your educators as you implement the science of reading. You as administrators are the leaders are the most important agents of change at your campus and your district. Your support, your leadership are the cornerstone of implementing any new implementation or an initiative. Educators look to you for leadership to guide them through the process of this change in instructional practices. But before we begin, I'm going to ask Sonia to just give a quick overview of the science of reading.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, and again, welcome everyone. So let's do a quick overview of what is the science of reading and really important for us to know about it. So the science of reading is a comprehensive body of research. It has been conducted over the last 5 decades, and it has been conducted across the world, and it's derived from thousands of studies conducted in multiple languages. And what it really does is it helps us to understand the cognitive processes that are essential for reading proficiency. So some of the different disciplinary fields that have been involved in this research include the education field, developmental and cognitive psychology, neuroscience, and linguistics. And the findings from all of these fields really helps us to understand how students learn, what they need to learn, and what happens when we teach them in different ways. And more importantly, it helps to answer the questions: what should we be teaching, when should we be teaching it, and how it should be taught.
Awesome. Thanks, Sonia. And I forgot to mention, throughout this presentation, you will see our friend in the background, Ian Samara, will be popping in links to some of the research that Sonia and I used as we gathered and prepared this this presentation for you. He just dropped the first one in there about what is the science of reading. So be on the lookout in your chat channel over there, come up your back channel to see where we are getting our information from. You can refer back to that at your leisure. So in looking at this information, Sonia and I decided to find out how much of our practices have changed in reading instruction. So this survey was given to educators and supervisors of educators, looking for how much has their practice changed since the 2017-2018 school year. So this also captures any changes that might have occurred due to our COVID pandemic. So when you take a look at this, we look at about 25% still need a little bit of help changing their instructional practices. This group, however, seems to be a little ahead of the curve on that, which is awesome. But we wonder, what is the reason for making these changes? The results don't really offer insight as to why teachers and administrators switched what they were using. The changes could also be the result of legislation around reading, but they also could be related to the changing needs of schools during this pandemic. Getting the laws passed has been the easy part, but just because you pass a law doesn't mean it changes anything for our students. Without the appropriate supports, resources, and professional development, the needle is going to continue to move slowly. So, when we look at why is it moving so slowly? So if you take a look at some of the reasons, it could be lack of education or educator preparedness at our universities. We have what we call the reading wars. There's been confusion in best practices, certainly since over the last couple of years. Sometimes educators may be reluctant to change because this too shall pass. And this to factor in the COVID pandemic, we had high absenteeism from our educators, from our students. There's unfinished learning. Upper grade level teachers are now having to teach more foundational reading skills that they may need extra support in. So this shift in teaching, are asking many of our schools and our educators not to just simply change their practices, but instead asking the science of reading to be adopted, and how our skilled learners learn to read, and what educators need and how administrators can support that paradigm shift. With good systems of support in which all stakeholders are trained in science of reading themselves, it will improve educator instructional and practices and ultimately impact student achievement. Another poll we're looking at is the good news is, that's the bad news. Bad news is it hadn't changed as quickly as we would like it to. Good news is a lot of changes happen as a result of the reading wars, and more science and research being done on how students learn to read, and actually adopting our instructional practices to match how the students learn to read. So when you look at this, you look at elementary teacher education programs have now adopted the tenets of reading in their curriculum. We've had many state legislative changes, as well as ESSER funding surrounding the science of reading. For the first time, a majority of elementary teacher education programs have adopted these tenets into their curriculum. This is according to the Teacher Prep Review by the National Council of Teaching Quality. 51% of United States programs that educate our elementary teachers have now earned an A or a B for their inclusion of key aspects, which is up 35% since 2013. Over the past several years, more states have passed laws and implemented other policies requiring schools to use evidence-based methods for teaching. These mandates touch on many different components of instruction, including teacher training, curriculum, and how students are identified for extra support. As of July 28th of this year, 30 states have passed laws or implemented new policies related to evidence-based reading. And I can attest to this personally. My daughter is a second-year teacher here in Texas, and she's like, "Mom, this is getting so difficult, but it's so much fun and engaging when I see my students' eyes light up and the light bulbs go on, when I know what I'm doing is evidence-based." She teaches second grade here in Texas. So what can we do to help promote this change at our campuses? So your job as leaders, we can do a lot of things to prepare. So you might be asking yourself, what can I do? First of all, we owe our educators to prepare them to become those literacy advocates. We have to communicate consistent science of reading expectations. We have to engage in proven methods through our professional development, and we must provide research-based resources and training on how to use those resources. So what's the first part? You yourself as a leader, you can become well-versed in the science of reading yourself, doing things like you're doing right now, looking for webinars, reading information online, attending conferences, or anything on the science of reading. Second thing, establish what those year-end goals should be. Because if we don't know what the target is, it's hard to move towards that target. So once you set that goal, right, then you need to go into develop the plan to implement those goals and set those milestones along the way, those frequent check-in points of how are we doing? Are we making progress towards that established goal? Excuse me. Choose an assessment and a progress monitoring tool that's going to give you the information in the science of reading to assess your progress towards those goals. And review your district and campus data to look at trends. Are there any trends that you can see? Is one grade level doing better than another grade level? Is it a certain area of reading, like phonics, phonemic awareness, that is doing better or worse, that might need a little extra support? And then consistently revisit that plan that you have to make sure that you're meeting those milestones as you go toward the science of reading. So what can your educators do? That part is your part as the leaders, is to set those goals, those milestones, continue to check frequently to make sure we're making progress, provide the tools and the training. The things that your educators can start doing now and that you can support is first, gradually learn, just like you did, everything you can about the science of reading. The second thing, which is a bone of contention sometimes, as we're talking about the reading wars, is to reduce that 3-cueing system. And that 3-cueing system involves having your students look at the picture, look at the first letter, or skipping the word and trying to figure it out. Those are guessing strategies. They are not reading strategies, and they're not scalable when you have to learn a new text. There are no decoding strategies in this. There are no decoding strategies in this method that can be applied to future text. The purpose for science of reading is to give students tools that they can apply in the future for unfamiliar text. The second thing, replace that predictable text with decodable text. If I'm explicitly teaching, which is the next bullet point, explicitly teaching phonics and phonemic awareness, then I should be able to apply those skills to unfamiliar decodable text. Number 4, like I just mentioned, is teach those phonics explicitly with purpose. The fifth thing is embed phonemic awareness whenever and wherever possible. We're not going to guess the sound or guess the word. We're going to apply those skills and then consistently build vocabulary and background. Surround your students with beautiful text and conversations and read aloud that has to do with vocabulary. This is particularly important to new readers as well as our ELLs. And Sonia is going to give us a little bit more information about the science of reading and the pillars of reading. So I'm going to hand this over to her.
Thank you, Sabrina. So I want to continue on talking about how we can support educators with the science of reading. And you all may be familiar with that 2000 National Reading Panel report. And following a comprehensive review of the research on the science of reading, this report stated that students need as Sabrina mentioned, that explicit instruction, but they need it in the essential components of reading, those 5 pillars, right? Phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and reading comprehension. They need that to become good readers. There are also 2 principles that are widely used to help explain the science of reading to classroom teachers and others involved in reading education to guide those instructional practices. And those principles are the simple view of reading and Scarborough's rope. So let's look a little bit more closely at that simple view of reading. So in the 80s, 2 psychologists, Goff and Tumner, developed a scientific theory of reading comprehension that they called the simple view of reading. And what this theory tells us is that reading comprehension is the product of decoding and language comprehension. So in order to be strong at reading comprehension, you have to be strong at decoding, and you have to have background knowledge and understand what you are reading. So if anything is missing on the left-hand side of the equation in the decoding or language comprehension area, then reading comprehension is going to be downgraded because inefficiency in one component may lead to overall reading failure. Now, Hollis Scarborough brought us another really great visual and another way that we can conceptualize reading and better understand how one learns to read. And that is through her metaphor using the Scarborough's reading rope. So it's a visual metaphor for the complexities involved in learning to read. She drew off of that simple view of reading with those different components, language comprehension and word recognition, but then she added on and listed those sub-skills underneath of those components. And we can think of those sub-skills as strands. And when woven together, those strands become the rope that represents skilled reading. So all of these strands on the rope are interdependent and they develop over time. So the idea then is that as student knowledge develops and increases with those individual language comprehension skills, a student's reading becomes increasingly strategic. And as that student knowledge develops and increases with the word recognition skills, those skills become increasingly automatic. So the combination then of these 2 areas is what gives us skilled readers. We then need to shift and think about, well, we know that the science of reading is the evidence and the research behind how students learn to read. So we need to think and turn to then the application or how we are teaching reading in the classroom, and this is where structured literacy comes into play. So structured literacy is an approach to teaching that is based on the science of how students learn to read, and it includes 6 elements, those evidence-based elements: phonology, sound symbols, syllables, morphology, syntax, semantics, so what we need to be teaching, right? But it also has evidence-based teaching principles. And these pedagogical principles are the how behind teaching the elements. And so those instructional principles are systematic and cumulative, explicit and diagnostic. So systematic and cumulative instruction really refers to lesson organization, and that organization needing to follow a logical order, the logical order of language. So the teaching sequence should begin with the easiest concept and progress to more difficult. And each step and lesson should build on previously learned concepts. Explicit instruction requires deliberate teaching of all of those important elements or components of literacy with continuous teacher-student interaction. So there should never be any guesswork. We can't assume that students will naturally deduce concepts on their own. And diagnostic, that last piece, that diagnostic teaching requires careful and continuous assessment, so both formal and informal, so that teachers can effectively measure student progress and adjust and differentiate instruction to meet a student's needs. So the big picture then of structured literacy is when reading instruction incorporates those evidence-based elements with the evidence-based teaching principles, students are going to receive instruction that is developmentally appropriate, and they will be on that path to becoming proficient readers. Sabrina, are you muted? She's going to.
Actually, yes, I was. Thank you. I was saying how I really love that simple view of reading, and Scarborough's wrote in particular. It reminds me of an analogy of you have your favorite sweater, and all of it's knit so beautifully together, and then all of a sudden you get a snag, and one of those strands, if it's not pulled out, or it's pulled out, can you still wear your sweater? Sure, but it's got a little snag in it. So in order for it to be working appropriately, wearing it beautifully, all of those strands need to be woven together just perfectly in order to have a beautiful sweater, but in this case, have beautiful reading, comprehension, and skilled reader. So thank you for that overview about systematic teaching and evidence-based teaching, the what and the how of science of reading. So appreciate that. Sure. So as we're thinking today and considering resources that will support your shift, it is key to have research-based formative assessments and progress monitoring tools to help you track that growth throughout the year. Remember, we're going to set those goals at the beginning, and then we're going to have those milestones that you want to meet to make sure we're tracking towards those goals. You need to have data that can provide informed instruction, that will provide you with informed instruction and to track your progress at all levels. So you need to have data that informs instruction at your campus level, your district level, your classroom level, all the way down to your student level to track that progress and inform instruction. And then what type of teacher resources should be provided to save that educator time? We know now more than ever that we don't have enough time for educators, and anything that we can do to provide for them to save them time and to make their lives easier is just golden right now. And then the fourth thing is the professional development to support your fidelity of implementation of whatever resource that you choose.
So I think, Sabrina, those are really great points to consider, but I think it's also important that all stakeholders understand what the purpose of a screener is. So I want to just quickly review that here. So the purpose for any screener is to determine readiness for grade level instruction. So if I'm a second grade teacher, give the screener and determine how ready are my students to learn my second grade core curriculum. That screener also can help to identify students who are at risk for struggling with that core instruction and determine if interventions are needed and the degree of intensity that those interventions may need to be. Finally, that screener can help as progress monitoring tools so that we can measure student growth across the year and measure growth towards our goals. I think it's also important that your screener is assessing the correct things. And when we say that, we want to think about those 5 pillars of literacy that we mentioned previously. When you are measuring the correct content and the correct skills, then you can easily go in and identify priority content to help drive instruction. So here's just an example of how I took subtests that we assess in on our iStation ISIP assessments, and I applied them under that simple view of reading. When I do that, I can get a clear snapshot when I'm looking at my data of understanding where the strengths are and where those critical areas of need are based on what I know about teaching students to read using that simple view of reading. And we know that instruction that we're giving needs to be based on careful and continuous assessment. And that content that's being presented needs to be mastered to a degree of automaticity before we move on. So if you're using iStation Screener, it's going to provide you with reports that are going to help to inform instruction and track growth to ensure that teachers are hitting the mark and providing that explicit instruction for whole group and in small group settings. So let's dive in, Sabrina, and take a closer look at some of those reports.
Great, thank you so much. So with iStation, we have numerous reports that are easily available that inform instruction and will help you track growth. And looking at this specific report at the campus or district level, you can easily see the performance of grade levels broken down into a quintile system that we call levels. This is important to determine the readiness for that core instruction and levels of potential scaffolding needed to allow all students to allow access to core instruction. This report can also provide a lens into the literacy areas tested by grade level that will determine areas of strength as well as areas in need of additional support, resources, and training. So in looking at your fourth grade across there, you can see where it has overall reading, comprehension, spelling, vocabulary, text fluency, and you can see the different colors in the green, the yellow, and the red. This will help me identify very quickly at the campus or district level what subtest area of literacy needs the most attention, and then I can start asking those really meaningful questions. Do we have the right resources to address that area? Do my teachers know how to use those resources at that area? What areas are excelling at? Can we provide some innovative opportunities for teachers to shadow and watch each other teach different areas of literacy to help increase their overall knowledge with the science of reading and instruction? The next report is about tracking your growth. This report shows trends by grade level or each skill assessed and the progress made by students through the current month as measured against performance goals within their initial cohort. This is useful to determine if those achievement gaps are closing at that desired rate and monitor all levels are showing continuing growth. This can be powerful use during your PLCs or data conversations at the grade level with educators to determine if their instruction and routines are impacting positively at all levels. So we're looking at each of those quintile levels. Regardless of level, are those students increasing? Is that slope or rate of acquisition increasing at a high enough rate to close the achievement gaps between the different levels? Then those rich conversations start happening again. If not, why not? What can we do? Is that milestone? Are we meeting those milestones as we progress throughout the year with our data? And even more impactful, the report can be viewed by areas of literacy. This is a great opportunity to have those data-rich reflections and conversations about the impact of instructional practices and resources for all areas of literacy. We know we need to be mindful choosing an assessment tool that includes the critical areas of literacy and provide that data to inform instruction and to track our growth. It is equally important to consider the student experience and additional educator resources. So as you're looking at your data, you start asking all of those questions of yourselves, your resources, your professional development, and your strategies. And the overall question that we consistently ask ourselves is what we're doing working? And is it making the level of progress I need it to make in order to reach our goals?
Thank you, Sabrina, for that overview. It's really important to also keep in mind how is the structure of the science of reading being kept alive when students transition into supplemental programs that are used in classrooms and at your campuses where they are working independently. So is there consistency with the science of reading and transitioning from those formative and summative assessments and that whole group and small group instruction to independent work? So if you currently are using some type of program, things to think about and ask yourself are, is it providing explicit and systematic instruction for students based on where they are to help build up the necessary skill areas? So is it purposeful or is it just practice and something that we're having them do to keep them busy? So in addition to aligning with the science of reading, I think some other key things to think about are, is that program engaging? Does it provide student agency along with social emotional learning? And then like Sabrina mentioned earlier, we know we were to ask any teacher how much free time they have, we know what the answers can be. Not a zip zero, right? So it's important to think about what types of additional resources are available for teachers with the programs that you're choosing to help deliver instruction, to help save them that time from having to create their own lessons. And are those lessons evidence-based and created around the science of reading? So I think some things to look for, obviously, are going to be lessons that revolve around all of the big 5 areas across all different skill levels. We can also think about graphic organizers and the power that the correct graphic organizers can have depending on grade level. Some other things to think about are games. You know that sometimes when games are included as resources for teachers, we can use those whole group and we can use them in small group, and then those can become a part of our workstations that help us differentiate when students are doing that individual or small group work while the teachers are busy working with small groups of students to be sure that they're on task. Think about books. Are there books available? Are those books leveled so that we can match them to students' reading abilities? Is there writing involved with the program and writing extensions? So just some things to think about.
Great, thank you, Sonia. And one of the things I really love, and Sonia went over like the online ISIP an online instructional path and educators' time. And one thing I know as an educator myself, I was always concerned is like, what are they doing on the computer? Is it teaching it as good as I can, right? And I can emphatically say yes, it does within the art program, within that online curriculum piece. Students are getting immediate corrective feedback throughout their path in iStation. So if they're stumbling and they don't quite get a concept, we are automatically going to give them that corrective feedback and then redirect them to a reteach, which is just amazing to know that that's happening automatically, which again saves that teacher time as they're working with other students in small group or whole group. So, and finally, what can we do to support our educators? What all can you do as the literacy leaders on your campus? So here's the best practices to provide structure to support and share your knowledge during your shift towards the science of reading. So you should provide opportunities, professional development opportunities that are differentiated. Just like we expect our educators to provide differentiated instruction to our students, then we need to be prepared to do that for our educators as well. We know that one size does not fit all when it comes to clothing, and certainly not when it comes to professional development, because there's a wide range of skills, abilities within our campuses and educators. So look for those opportunities that will give some more veterans teachers who have those experiences with science of reading to perhaps mentor other teachers or share their knowledge, and then provide those educators who are less familiar. They're going to need a little bit more help and scaffolding as they move along their journey to the science of reading. The second thing is provide that collaboration time with your educators to do that differentiated and that PLC learning with one another. The next thing is you can provide scientifically based curriculum and resources for your educators. In addition, provide these sessions an opportunity for active learning through observation, giving actionable feedback, and collaboration during your PLCs. Create those engaging, ongoing learning opportunities, not one and done. They have to be sustained throughout the year. And those PD sessions should continue to build upon previous knowledge, just like we do in our classroom. These need to be aligned with your predetermined goals. That professional development and your PLCs need to be aligned with your predetermined milestones, using that data to help drive that instruction. And I just really appreciate spending your time with us today. And if you have any questions, be sure that you're dropping those into the question and answer area, as well as be sure you're checking the chat channel, like the back channel, checking for any of the links in there from further investigation. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to see if there are any questions lingering that you would like Sonia and I to address before we log off today.
Awesome, perfect. Yes, so like Sabrina was saying, we've now come to the Q&A portion of the webinar today. And if you haven't already, you can send in your questions in writing, and you can do that by accessing the Q&A panel that we have right there. It's on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. It's the option next to the chat button. If you can't see it, there should be three dots or an ellipses next to the chat button. So click on that, and that should bring you to the Q&A panel. All right, so the first question that we had that came in, so with the science of reading, how do you maintain continuity of instruction and practice? So like in your HCT programs, after school intervention programs, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, great. Thank you. That is a great question. So, HTT, just for those of you who may not know that terminology, that is our high dosage tutoring, which is huge right now, especially with all the different being creative, if you will, about how we're providing additional learning opportunities for unfinished learning. So, the good news about science of reading, I don't think this is when the pendulum is going to swing one way and then back the other way. We know that science of reading is scientifically based in how a student, a child, learns to acquire language and then also learns to read. So science of reading strategies can be applied in any reading setting. Yes, science. Yes, math. But more importantly, in the high dosage tutoring in your ELA classrooms, and when you apply the science of reading to any setting, your students will be successful. So it works anywhere, in other words. In one instance, this is a one-size-fits-all because it is brain-based, and you can actually see if you're interested. If you Google, I like to Google a lot, functional MRIs, which you would look at a child's brain, if you will, before intervention and before science of reading, and after science of reading intervention, you can actually see the different parts of the brain that are firing that were not firing off before. So I just find that really cool and interesting. Any other questions?
Yes. So this next question, so when implementing, the science of reading, how does that implementation differ in the context of, dual language or bilingual literacy programs?
Well, the answer is going to be the same, actually. Biliteracy, dual language, any of those settings, the science of reading, regardless of language, students still learn to read in the same sequence and order. What differs is how the language works. Where we know that for Spanish biliteracy and dual language, that language is a very transparent language, meaning it pretty much the sounds and symbols pretty much follow the rules, versus English is more opaque. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult sometimes to acquire English language if you're not an English, first language is English, but it works in any setting. That's what's really nice and convenient with iStation too, but certainly with the science of reading.
Awesome. Perfect. And before I ask the next question, I'm just saying we still have time. So if there are any questions that you still have, please submit them in the Q&A panel chat here. And if you can't find that, it's fine. You can post it in the chat, and I'll make sure that I ask them. Okay, so the next question that we have here, so this one is about, in the context of special ed, how do you teach the science of reading for special ed students?
Sure. Special education is actually my background. So students who are being serviced through special education services, they too benefit from the science of reading. It may take them longer, because they are reading special education services, but the way we learn to acquire language does not change regardless of setting. They will need more structure. More than likely, they will probably need more visual cueing and information like more structured learning within the setting of instruction. It could, if they're in a general ed classroom where it's a push-in model, it may need some support from a special education teacher or a paraprofessional. If it's a pull-out where they're going out of their general ed classroom into a special ed classroom, it may be in the form of more visual schedules to get them through the process in the classroom. And then when they do come to that teacher for instruction, that instruction is not going to change. They may take more repetitions on it and more practice, but they will get it.
Awesome. Perfect. Next question. So the person who put this in there is saying that their school or districts, they're really set in their ways of teaching reading in particular way that they are, and looks like this person, they're an educator, and they want to advocate for the science of reading in the school. So, what's the way to get started?
Sonia, do you want to address that one, or do you want me to?
You go for it. I'll interject if I have things to add.
Perfect. So what I hear is that you are on board, but how do you get those around you to come along on the journey with you? And I like to say the proof is in the pudding. So I would say you start by doing it yourself and proving that it works through data, looking at the progress that your students are making and sharing that progress with your team. And sometimes it might be a stronger hint, if you will. Maybe find an interesting article, share this webinar with them, share some of those links with them via email, and slowly but surely they will come around, especially when teachers are seeing progress. If I'm seeing those light bulbs go on with what I'm doing, man, that's a great feeling as an educator, and I want more of that. And so if those teachers are seeing you experience that, and then they start experiencing that themselves, they will start getting on board with you. So I would encourage you to share this information with them as well as any of the links that are in our chat.
Yes, Sabrina, I'm just going to add too that there's a really great slide in the slide deck, which I believe you will all have access to give you ideas of how to shift to implement that science of reading into your schools. There were 6 key things Sabrina mentioned that can really help you if you need a place to know where to start.
Yes, thank you.
One of them, do it gradually. Get them on board.
Awesome. Perfect. So I see we have one more question that came in. So if you still haven't asked the question, please do so now within that time frame. So the next question that I have here is the person looks like they have at their school or district. So they're already using a reading instruction program.
Mhm.
They have various screeners. Why would their school need iStation?
Sure. Well, one source of one piece of data is only part of the product or part of the answer. So what I recommend is you triangulate that any data that you have available in addition to iStation, you can combine that data with any other tool that you may have, combine that with teacher observations or anything, because one thing is not going to give you everything you need. Because if it did, we would all be multimillionaires, right? I would invent it, but I would say that iStation, and I've known it for almost 20 years now as an educator and then working for iStation, that it has been proven in my personal past to be very on target with what I already knew about the students, but I still encourage you to triangulate with any other data so you get the full picture of that student. So combine it with anything else you already have to make sure that what we're doing is representative of what that student needs, and triangulate any and all data that you have available to you. We at iStation, through our professional development services, are happy to help you with that journey. We do that quite often. So if you decide to go with iStation, you already have another tool, we're happy to help you triangulate that data so it's more meaningful for you and impactful and data-driven and action-oriented.
Awesome. Perfect. Oh, you're going to say something? Sorry.
Nope, I was just agreeing with you.
All right, perfect. So that was the last question that was submitted today. That said, I'm going to go through my closing slides in a moment, but as I'm going through them, if any questions do come to mind during that time, please feel free to continue submitting any questions that you have, and I'll make sure that they're sent over to our friends at iStation so they can be answered at some point in the future. But first off, thank you again to Sabrina and Sonia for your time here today, and of course, thank you to iStation. And to you, our audience, I would also like to thank you for joining us here today as well. For those of you who enjoyed our presentation, there are many more upcoming web seminars like this one that are provided by us here at District Administration. DA is the leader in editorial coverage of news, current issues, and trends in K through 12. We have a wide range of readers who subscribe for free to DA, like many of you, and they stay up to date with us in our magazine, online. We also have newsletters and web seminars like this one. Also, if you would like to watch what you saw here again today, or if you believe that the solutions that Sabrina and Sonia talked about today If you think it'd be helpful to your colleagues, which I'm sure that's the case, you'll be pleased to know that our team here at DA, we will be sending you an email later tomorrow, and in that email, there will be an on-demand recording of the web seminar, as well as a link to the slides. So with that, on behalf of District Administration, this is Stephen Blackburn. Thanks, everyone. Take care, be well, and stay safe. Thank you very much.